Welcome, everyone. Well, today we have a fun and different show. Usually I'm working with fabric and I'm working with embroidery. Today we're going to do things a little bit different. And before we start, just remember anybody, as you're coming on, to not touch any of the links. If you see any links in the feed, then make sure to not click on any of them. Nobody should be asking you for anything. And we're just going to wait as a few more people come on. And before we get going, today we're going to be looking at some of the tricks about how we use our stitches, even how we use our fonts. And I'm going to start with a little fun technique that I learned a long time ago. For some reason, I clicked onto it, and then I've been using this on and off through the years, but I don't think I've ever showed it before. So you'll be the first ones to have seen it. So, all right, we're going to get going. Now, today, one of the things we're going to talk about is I've made this card. Now, this card, the print is not fabric and it's not embroidery. And then I've added this little poinsettia to it. And the little poinsettia is done with wool and a piece of wool that looks like this. So I'm going to take you through the steps of all of it so you can see exactly how this was done. And it's really pretty fun and creative. I hope you're going to like it. Now, all of this started with a napkin. And when you're working on paper and you're making cards and things like that, and you're not using fabric, then the rules are a little bit different. So I like to have a little bit of a print sometime, and there's some beautiful, beautiful napkins out there. And so I learned a technique for adhering the napkin to the board or the card. So this is just, a nice quality cardboard that will hold up nicely. And that's what I fused to the napkin. So when you look at this, all right, if you open this napkin up, you'll see that there's actually 2 layers to this napkin. All right, so I want to have only just 1 layer. So I'm going to pull this away. All right, and now all I've got left is a very thin piece of tissue. And I'm going to adhere it onto my cardboard so that I could make the card. I'll show you another couple of examples, and then I'm going to show you how I did it. All right. Here was one that I posted yesterday on my Facebook page, and I've got the ribbon embroidery designs on the bottom. You'll notice this one's a little bit lumpy and bumpy, and that's because when I adhered it, I forgot to take that second layer away, and that's what happens if you don't take the second layer away. You really want the printed side of the napkin to be adhering well. This was the original napkin that I worked with for that one. You can see it's a nice big napkin. And this one too has a different layer that comes off just like that. And then I've got one more example before I get going. And this was a napkin that is got a nice little Christmas tree on it. And the nice thing about napkins are they've often got nice prints. And when you think about setting your table, either for Thanksgiving or Hanukkah or Christmas, often we buy some really nice napkins, and we would like to coordinate our napkins with the rest of our table runners and like name tags and things like that. So from this napkin, I've made a few different cards. This was one card. I just adored the lesson that Dawn and Phil did with the My Sonnet. And you can find that listed up on the top of the listing. I know Amy posted where you can find the link to this exercise. Not only does it tell you how to create this in our software, but it also does give you the finished design if you find that you just want to stitch the design out and see what it's like. Now, in this case, there's the same napkin. On the back, I've got that little tree showing. Well, that tree was also underneath here, and it kind of like hides it. But look at that fringe. Isn't that just beautiful? It was such a great exercise that Dawn and Phil did about how to create fringe designs. Now, from this, I also created a couple of name tags. And this name tag, I added the stitches around the outside of it give you a little bit of a different look at that. And then here's another one before I've done, and I've created on the back, there's place to write somebody's name on that one. And then I even made a little gift card so that you could put a gift card inside. And I've used the sewing stitches to sew along all the edge and give it a nice little finished look to it. And look at how cute that is for a gift card. So that is something that is just very easy to do. And what I started with is I'm going to switch over my camera now and show you how I did this. All right. So to start with, I know this sounds really amazing and different, but I use saran wrap, and I took the board that I have underneath. You'll see the boards underneath here, and I put the saran wrap on top of it. And then I put the napkin, the single layer of napkin on top. And when I go and I iron this, look at, I have this nice little sharp point to my iron, which means I can get in there nice and close. And the moment I iron it, everything fuses to the board. All right. And then I'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. When it's finished, look at that. Isn't that amazing? You can see there's a little bit of shininess from the saran wrap left, but that adhered perfectly to the board. And so now I can embroider on this. I can do anything I want to with it. And I'm just going to stop here for a moment because I do want to remind everybody that I love questions. So let me know if there's something else that you want to find out about or something that I need to make more clear, because I want to make sure you really understand how to do this. Okay. So I think that when you're looking at this, you can see how nicely it adhered to. I didn't have to use any spray adhesive. I didn't have to use glue. As a matter of fact, if you'd used any type of glue with this tissue, the tissue paper would have fallen apart, because the moment it gets wet, it just falls apart. So it's really valuable to have this little technique. Now, I've tried some different wraps. The one that I'm using right now is saran wrap, and this works great. I've tried a couple of others, and some of them work great, some of them not so much. I think some of them these days might have some extra components in there, but it is very, very easy to do. And you saw how immediately it adhered, right? Just when the iron touched to it, it immediately fused to the background. I'm using a dry iron. That's a great question. I'm using a dry iron because if I used any kind of a steam, what would have happened is it would have wet the napkin and then it would have started to fall apart. So, and then the other thing was the iron I used at the highest heat. My iron, I'm using a Singer iron right here. And what I love about this iron, you'll notice it's got this really nice sharp point. It works perfect for getting into the corners and making sure that nothing gets stuck on the side of my iron. So this is a perfect iron for doing that type of thing. I usually do like steam in everything I do, but when it comes to this, you really can't use steam. And so the I'm just reading a couple of comments here. And so when you think about this, you see how nice that was, right? There's my base. And then what I did was I had to crease the card so that it would give it a nice fold. And usually I'm just going to use something like maybe a tip of a shish kebab stick, something that's not sharp, but it's got a small end and it won't cut through the paper. And I'll put my ruler along the edge and where I want that fold to be. And I'm just going to drag that shish kebab stick or something like that across it. And so then I can get a nice crisp fold. And I'm going to go back to the iron to get that done. Now, the poinsettia was really fun and very, very easy to do. And I'm going to just show you what I did. I used this piece of wool, and this really is 100% wool. And all I did is I cut them into these little pieces, and I didn't sew them on the card because I didn't want to have the stitching come through, because then I would have had to put another layer there instead. So really I started with one, I did a straight stitch through the center, and then I just added them in and kept sewing to the other side. Then I would come back to the middle and I would keep adding them more on. And I did not use any stabilizer or anything for that. But what I did do was lighten my press to foot pressure, because our foot will come down really heavy on the wool, and I wanted it to just have a very light touch so that I could sew from point to point. But you can see how quickly a poinsettia would come together. Isn't that adorable? And that would be really nice on a little tag or something too. So a couple of questions. How do you keep the saran wrap from melting on the iron? Well, funnily enough, Kim, there is a really easy answer to that. Let me show you. What I did was, this was the tissue that I took off. All right, that's the one that doesn't have the print on it. And so what you do is you put that on top, and now when you're ironing, the extra saran wrap will get caught onto the napkin and won't come on your iron. What a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. And I had this prepared just for that occasion. So you see, I'm not really working too hard to get that done. All right. Now, the other thing to take into account when you're doing this, and let's see if that might be enough to see if it's done. You'll see that the tissue on the top is kind of sticking because it's sticking to the saran wrap. And now when I've got it done, you can see it's still connected here. I haven't even cut it away. Let me just trim that away so I can lift that up for you. Or I can show you on the other one. But what I did want you to see is, depending upon the card that you're using, I'm going to get that cut so I can get it moved away here. If you are going to put tissue on top of it, you need to keep the iron. You'll notice this part is really nicely ironed, but this outside edge didn't get done. And that's because when you're putting something on top of it, you need to keep the pressure on for longer. All right. And it takes a little bit more time. I usually start to set the center of it. And then when I'm coming to do the outside edges, I'm going to leave the iron on a little longer. And we can just make that go away there. There's my saran wrap. I just pulled it away. And I'm not worried about it being perfect because I'm not going to do anything with this. But I just want you to give you an idea of how that works. All right. And then I'm just going to pull it away. And now it's perfectly adhered to all of that. Now, but what is important to think about is when you're doing this, in this case, on the top one, I used a white backboard. And on the one underneath that I just did, I had a yellow underneath it. Every time I do something, the color of the back will change the color of the finished design. Do you notice that this one is much brighter? I used a bright green board underneath here. And there's a good question, Glenda, about the cardstock. So this is a cardstock. I usually buy it from a craft store where you can get, you can buy a 12 by 12 piece. So that way you can cut it down and use it in any way you want to. Let me just stand that up there. You can see how nice it stands up. And it's very easy for it to support itself. And because there is that cardstock there. If you use something too thin, it wouldn't stand up very well. It wouldn't be very good. Now, in this case, and I see I've got a couple more questions. I'll come back to them in a moment, okay? So in this case here, I thought because this was a fringe flower that it would be a not dense design. What you have to be careful about choosing your designs when you're going to embroider on a cardstock, because if you're using a satin stitch, this card will start to fall apart. And up here in the flower, when you look at the star really didn't do very well because the card was starting to fall apart because the star was just too dense. So that would be an example of maybe it would have been a good place for a button or a sequin instead of embroidering that star out there. So that's the kind of thing you have to think about when you're embroidering or doing stitches on cardstock. All right. And Jamie asked about trimming the edges to clean. Really what I do, all right, if you look at this, this is what I've got done. You'll see there's a little bit of shiny stuff up top. I will usually go at this point and put the rotary cutter with it and just trim off all the edges. You don't need to worry about it being there. Just trim it off. And in this case, I trimmed so that the red line was just there, and then I trimmed everything else away. These are great questions. Thanks so much. Now, another question is about using an applique pressing sheet. I think if you use the iron-on pressing sheet, it's a great idea, but I'm not sure enough heat is going to get to the tissue. I would, if you've got one, I would try it. But if you feel it's not sticking, then just take that napkin piece off, right? You've just taken this off your napkin. It's a very, very thin piece. It's not going to stick to the main napkin, but the extra saran wrap will stick to it. And so that way you won't have a problem with it going on your iron. And that's a much easier solution to do because I know the heat is going to get exactly to the tissue where it needs to be. All right. Now, the funny thing about this napkin was I took off the extra layer of the napkin, right? There's one. And I went back and afterwards I was looking at it and I thought, I ironed it on and it was getting bubbling again. And I thought, well, how can it be bubbling? So I took one layer off like that. And then I used it and it was all bubbling up on me. And I thought, how can it be? There's no sense to that, right? Well, little did I know that some napkins are not 2-ply, they're 3-ply. So it's all about the quality of the napkin you're getting. But one way or another, I went back and read the package and it did say on there that it was 3-ply. So usually the napkins, if they're very cheap, are just going to have one layer. Almost all napkins have 2 layers. So you got to take that extra layer away. And here's an example, okay, of the first one I did when I had, you see how all the wrinkles and things that are in there? That's because there's actually another layer underneath. If I peel it away, you can see the layer that's underneath there. So that's how I realized. Now, this time, when I did the exact same thing twice because I didn't realize what I did. And when I thought, well, the solution to this is I'll just put another layer of saran wrap and then I'll iron the next one on. But you can see there's like a shadow because I didn't put the napkin exactly where the underpiece was. And so I'm seeing a shadow underneath there. But that looks all right. Anyways, now let me show you a few other examples because I just think the idea of these cards, you know, whether it's a placemat for putting somebody's name at a holiday table or whether you're looking for gift cards, I could make probably 8 or 10 of these from just one square napkin. And then you would have it matching all your table, you know, all your table napkins and everything else. And you really could get a beautiful set. When it comes to, let me just pull over another example here. All right. And so I did another one here, which is just a kind of cute little graphic. And this is some sparkle, metallic sparkle. And then the back one is another kind of a heavier cardstock. And I needed another color that was going to work well. And so that's why what I did here is I just took some of the tissue and different colors of plain green tissue. And I just colored them with a fabric marker and then glued them on so that they would give me a little bit of variety here. But you notice that the bottom, I used the satin stitch for the trunk of the tree, and that didn't work well. I actually did this on a different card. And then what happened was because I used the satin stitch, the card started to fall apart. So all I did was I cut the trees out and then I sewed them with a sewing line. You can't really see it. There's actually a sewing stitch and I attached them to the other card. Then I added the little green trim here and then I lined it with the green inside. So that's kind of a festive card. It's nice to be able to kind of brighten them up with some brighter colors and stuff like that. Here's another one that was just a little embroidery design that I didn't really want to fuse it to the card. So what I did was I just tacked it. I put a little, if you see here, I just tacked the wings a tiny bit up here with just a little bit of clear gel glue. And then later on, somebody can pull that off and they can keep it as a little ornament. So that's something very, very easy to do. Okay. And then I've got a few other examples, and then we're going to go over to our machine because I want to show you how you can use your fonts and how you can change your fonts for your cards. Let me see if I got another card here. Oh, I've got a couple of different ones. Here's one that I did, and I used this snowflake design that is in menu 5, and I'll show you that design. And I'm also going to show you how you can balance that stitch. Have you ever done a decorative stitch that's a maxi stitch, a big wide stitch, and it hasn't been balanced so well? When it stitches out, it doesn't look good. Well, there's actually a way in your machine so that you can bring it back into balance very, very easily. I'm going to show you how to do that, okay? Does anybody else have any other questions? Because I'm going to go over to my machine in a moment. So it's a good time to ask questions. And a couple of other ones that I have. Here's just a little bit of a lace. This can be a freestanding ornament. All I did was I put the ribbon through the ornament, and on the back of it, if you look inside, I've attached the ribbon back here, but the ribbons can slide off, so they can take it off and hang that on the tree. Very, very easy. And I've got a nice little envelope, and I put the little embroidered lace design there with the envelope, so it kind of gives it a little festive look. Now, this card is a little bit beat up, but this is how I usually play around like this. This was a stitch, a single stitch that we have on menu 5.4. And all I did was I made a little applique for the base of it. And it got a little beat up. It got a little bent. So I kind of abandoned working with it. But I've always meant to go back and do it. And I think that's kind of a lot of fun. Now, the interesting thing about doing something like this with the napkin, with anything that we're doing, like the... here, when I'm stitching on them, I am not using any stabilizer, okay? The napkin is being fused to the cardboard with the saran wrap, and then you don't need to use stabilizer because you want the back to look nice, right? So you don't really want to have stabilizer underneath there. So, but that's a really great question about stabilizers. Now, there are times where you might need to use a stabilizer to create the design. Like, for example, when I did the fringe tree, I needed to use a stabilizer. So what I did was I used a tearaway in the hoop, and then I laid the cardstock flat onto the tearaway, and I did not baste it in the hoop because I didn't want the base marks to go through the cardstock. And so instead, because the card is so stiff, all you have to do is lay it there, and it embroidered just fine without me doing anything. Okay. All right. So the last card, when we're talking about, we're going to go to the machine, and I'm going to show you some of the tricks about using the fonts and also using decorative stitches and stitching through. Now, when you look at this one here, the inside of this card, I did kind of put a color base to it, but I didn't glue down the bottom of it. So when you look underneath here, you'll see there's the stitches. And in this case, I think the stitches look nice. And from both sides, they didn't really need anything else. So all I did was just leave it open like that. But this card sits nice and firm, and it's really, it's got nice body to it. There's some questions about how to lighten the presser foot pressure and how much to lighten the presser foot pressure. So I'm glad you caught on to that, because I'm going to show you how to do that, all right? We're going to switch over to my machine, and today I'm sewing on the Creative Icon 2, and I'll bring some of these things over so that we can look at them, all right? All right, now, this is the stitch for the, wait a second. This is the stitch that I used. I'm just adjusting my other camera here, so hold on one second. All right. So this stitch is Snowflake. I love this little snowflake. You can find it in menu 5.2, and it is stitch number 44, the last one. Now, sometimes when you stitch out these stitches, I don't know if you've ever had an experience when you go and you stitch out that stitch and you'll see that it's not lined up the way it's supposed to be. Do you see the straight line here? Well, that should come down the center, but it's kind of pushed its way out of the way. And so there is a way to correct this, and it's very, very easy to do. And what you're going to do is you're going to go down. Have you ever noticed there's a balance button on many of our PFAFF machines? We have the ability to correct this. If you have a newer machine and you have maxi stitches, big ones like this, what you do is you open the balance button and you make the stitch look like what the problem is. See how I'm adjusting this? This line is now going to the left of it. That's not what I want to do. I want to make it look exactly. So the bottom line is going to the right. So that's what I want to do. And then I can kind of see, is there anything else I need to adjust? Let's see. See how it's shortening it up? It's scrunching it all up. So I can make my stitch look exactly like the problem stitch. And then when I go to sew it, it will stitch out beautifully. And I do have an example of when I corrected the stitch. Look at how it changed it completely, right? This is what the stitch should look like. And this is the stitch the way that it was. It was just out of balance a little bit. But we're meant to go in there and correct that. And it's a very, very easy way to correct it. So I hope if you've ever had the chance or you ever have the experience where a stitch is out of balance, that you give it a try, because it's very, very easy to do. And if you have any questions about this, I'll come back to the screen a little bit later and I'll answer those. But it really is amazing how simple and easy it is to correct this right in the machine without anything other than a couple of clicks on your finger. All right, so I'm going to close that down, and we're going to talk about using the fonts. Now, if you want to use a font for a card or for anything, for a quilt, we have different fonts. We have sewing fonts. These are examples of sewing fonts. And then we have embroidery fonts, which are bigger, usually satin type of stitches. The difference with a sewing font is they sew out like a regular sewing stitch, and they usually have a connection that will connect all of the stitches, which you don't necessarily want when you're doing something fancy like a card. So I started playing around with what the stitches look like so that I knew what I was going to get. You see here, I was going to write Merry Christmas. Not only did I find out that it was a bit too big for one card, because just that font is just, it's not an amazing sewing font. But what I recognized was between the different letters, there's 4 stitches. And here there's quite a bit of extra stitches. So I realized that sometimes if we're looking at the smaller fonts, I can go in and take those stitches away. And I kind of played with that. And I'm going to show you how to do it in Stitch Creator. So here is an example. I didn't take the stitch away, but I did trim the stitches away. And that looks, I think, kind of a lot nicer, doesn't it? Here was the original one. I just wanted to see what it would look like and get a sense of how big these are. Now, in this case, we cannot bring the large fonts into Stitch Creator because the stitches have to be able to fit in under 12 inches or 9 inches. So in this case, what I would do I would just sew from here to here, and then I would stop. And then I would do the next word and go to the next place and try and skip past those stitches. All right, let me just check and make sure if we have any questions before I get going, all right? All right. So, that's a great question, Kathy. Kathy asked about what kind of needle. Now, I always use the smallest needle I can get away with because I don't want to put a bigger hole in the cards or the cardboard, right? And so if you used a big, heavy needle, then that would make the hole a lot bigger. So I usually will use a 7511 needle. That's the normal one for me. And next, I'm going to show you how you can adjust your press-a-foot pressure when it came to sewing with these poinsettias. And I'm going to show you how I did it too. So, all right. Now, we've got some good questions about let me just come up here. So the way that you adjust your press-a-foot pressure, anytime you're working with something that's got this like very heavy, it's very fluffy, and I'm not using a stabilizer or anything, is to go up to the settings. And on the Quilt Expression 720 or any of our machines, you have pretty much the option of changing the press-a-foot pressure. You're going to find that press-a-foot pressure right here. See where it says press-a-foot pressure? I've changed it from a 5. The original setting was 6.5, which is very, very heavy. And so by changing that and lightening it up a little bit, when I was working on the wool with no stabilizer, it allowed me to be able to sew all of those and not have to worry about it stretching out or staying in the same place. Often when I'm working with heavier fabrics, bulkier fabrics, and I feel like the foot is sinking down too heavy, or sometimes even with leather and things like that, I'll lighten the press-a-foot pressure up a little bit. So all I have to do is decide where I want it to be. I usually will start at 5, and then if I still feel the foot is too heavy, then I'm going to lighten it up a little bit more. Those settings are there because they're there for us to use them. So don't be shy about giving them a try. Now, in this case, we're going to go over here. All right. And I'm just going to go back to a straight stitch. And I'm going to see if I can, hold on here. I'm going to just get my other camera going. And I'll lower it down a little bit so that we can see better. All right. And I'm going to show you how you can add some of these stitches. Okay. Let's see. I think that is going to be as close as we can get here. Let's see if we can zoom in. Yeah. Well, this will be all right. So just for a second, I'm going to just show you how I made this poinsettia. And then I'm going to come back to some of the other things. Now, Jamie asked about, can we resize the fonts? Yes, we can in sewing, and I'm going to show you how. So right now, all I'm doing is I'm sewing one of the poinsettias. I'm going to choose a straight stitch. All right. And then I'm going to put the next one, and I'm just going to tuck it underneath the foot so that they're sewing one right next to each other. Now, if the foot was too much pressure, it kind of wants to pull the little leaves far apart. So all I'm going to do now is I'm just sewing backwards to the center. All right, and I stop with my leaf and I push the leaf so it's right there, right connected. And then all I'm going to do is go in a different direction and put another little leaf in there. And now I'm going to sew back to the end. And I can go in reverse if I want to, back to the center. Or I could stop and turn around. So that's all I did for the poinsettia, was just to add more and more leaves. Take off the reverse. And I didn't worry about sewing to the end of it. What's nice about the wool is it won't ravel on you, and it's not getting sucked down into the plate. It just does. Our machines do a beautiful job sewing something like that. So when you look at the poinsettia, that's how it was done. You can see I stitched down to about here, and then I went back, and then I just kind of kept adding them, and I would push them aside. I kind of started with 4 or 5, and then I would push the 2 aside and kind of just keep adding more layers together like that. And that's how it started. Very, very simple. You could see that's 4 leaves, and there's an obvious place to add one in between each of these. And all I would do would be add it by moving these across, and then just kind of keep adding more and more to that. So that was a really fun thing to do. All right, now we're going to go to Stitch Creator so I can show you how you can change some of the beginning and ends of the stitches. All right, so Stitch Creator is on many of our machines. The Quilt Expression 720 is the first one that has it. And you can find Stitch Creator on the 720. It's going to be on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. But here on the Creative Icon 2, I'm going to touch Stitch Creator. All right. And the stitches, when you bring them in here, are supposed to be 9 millimeters so that they would fit in. You can't use the big maxi stitches in here. But the font is a little bit different, I noticed. So I'm going to choose the Comet Alphabet size 12 millimeters. All right. And then I get a screen down below to type something. So say I want to do the W. That's a capital W. So let's look at the stitch. You'll see there's a connecting stitch here. And at the end, there's 2 stitches. So I'm just going to turn off the multi-select. All right. And this stitch is the one that's selected as the last one. So I'm just going to touch edit stitch, and I'm going to delete that stitch. So now I've got one stitch. And what I discovered that works well is maybe instead of deleting it, that I can just make the stitch point longer. All right. So if I wanted to make that stitch point longer, I just touch here. You see how far it's moving it? So it's like one big jump stitch. So I can move it past the end of that stitch. And now I can go in and select another stitch. So I'm going to go to the font, and I'm going to select the same alphabet. Now this time I want a smaller stitch. Okay. So I'm going to touch the arrow, and now I'm going to get a small letter instead of the large letter. Now you can see, and I can move this up. I'm going to go. So you can see I can touch the side, and I can see everything that's orange is selected right now. So I'm going to turn that off. And what I want to do is get rid of that little jump stitch in the beginning. So I'm going to touch the trash can. Oh, that didn't work out very well, did it? So you can see here when you're doing this that there has to be some thought to how you're going to do it. Because sometimes you might touch a stitch and you think it's the right one, but it's not. And then you end up starting over because there is no undo in Stitch Creator, okay? So, but look what I'm going to do. I'm going to select everything from that stitch, all right? I'm going to touch multi-select, and I'm going to just get all of these stitches selected, and then I'm going to put them in the trash can, all right? Every one of these stitch points can be moved. And if I add a stitch, I can decide where it's going to go, all right? It's selected. And I can move it where I want to. And this one I'm going to do here. I'm completely changing the way this stitch is going to stitch out. I can take the point and I can drag it where I want it. And then I could take this point and delete it. All of this, look at, I'm changing, absolutely changing the whole way that the design is made. So I'm going to just delete that. And I want to go back in and let's just do something. Wait a second. Delete all of it. All right. So I'm going to go back in again, and we're going to start one more letter. Now you notice if I go to the grand alphabet, which is 7 millimeters, when I select it, it will tell me it's not editable. And that's because it's too wide. So if it won't let you do it, it won't let you do it. That's the only choice. Okay. So I'm coming back and I've got my W. You'll notice everything's selected. It says select multiple. And when it's orange, that means that's active. So I deleted it. And this first stitch is the very easiest one to get rid of. You see that one? Because now I just touch it and I touch delete. And then here, if I wanted to make this a big long stitch or move it, see, I can move that. Now this stitch here, what happens if I touch that and touch the trash can? Look at that. Isn't that nice? All right. Now, if I want to come down and start my next stitch here, I have to select that. Otherwise, it's not going to be showing. All right. So I'm going to go in and let's try it again. And we're going to get, well, let's do a capital E. Let's just do that for the fun of it. All right. Now, in this case, the capital E, there's one big jump stitch and then there's the letters. Now let's go and look at what the end of it looks like. All right. Well, it won't. Let me just do this here. Let me go. Usually I can go down and drag it down. There we go. Now, after the letter E's here, we've got this extra stitch, which is great. And you'll notice here there's two stitches that are close together. That's kind of like a little tie off. I'm going to add this down. And I want this, it's not straight. When you look at this here, you'll see it goes up a little bit. That's part of the design. It happens over here. So if I wanted the top and the bottom to be straight, I could do it. Now, let me just see if there's any questions before I keep going. Okay. All right. Anybody have any questions? All right. So if I wanted to change the size of this, I'm not going to do it here. I'm going to do it after I get out of the Stitch Creator screen. All right. So I'm going to come back in and I'm going to touch OK. All right. Now what you're seeing is we, right? So if I wanted only one of those, that word, I could do a couple of different things. I could go to the stitch repeat button and just say I want one of them. Single pattern, I only want one of them. See, and now it will do the word we, and then it will stop at the end of it. And when I did that, here, you'll look at this. You'll notice here I had the jump stitch. Here I took out the little stitches. And so I went to the W, and then it went a big jump stitch to the I, and then a big jump stitch to the S, and a jump stitch to the H. And so you don't see any needle marks the way you did with this one when I did the word we. Here I did the letter W and then the letter E separately. I did them in 2 different steps, but this actually worked out much better. All right, now when it comes to sewing, if I want to change the size of the font and make it smaller, I touch the minus and I can change the width of it too. And I can make it any size that I want it to be. When I bring this in, if I wanted to save this and bring it into embroidery or use these fonts in embroidery, I'm going to go to embroidery and let's see how the fonts look. When I go to my fonts, which is the A, all right, these are all embroidery fonts and my stitch fonts are over here. And if I was to, let's say I make, we'll use the grand alphabet one, okay? Because this is a massive one. And I'll just type in the word happy. It's only capital letters. All right. And now I'm just going to say, okay, I'm ready to go. Check mark. All right. And I'm going to move the design out of the way. And I could rotate it and everything afterwards. But let's see if it'll let us change the size. So do you see the scale button is all grayed out? That means you cannot change the size of the sewing fonts in embroidery. So you're kind of limited about how you can do that. And that's something to consider too. When you're choosing your fonts, when you're choosing, like for example here, right? You see these are bigger stitches here. I could easily do the letter A and then just stop and then go to the letter M and I wouldn't have all those jump stitches there. So there's lots of ways of kind of playing around with that. Do you notice I did the snowflake here and I came around and did the card like that? This is kind of where I just played around with the stitch and what it was going to look like and whether I would like it or not. Okay, let me come back and see if we've got any questions going. So anybody have any questions about Stitch Creator? So the luxury about Stitch Creator is you can go and take a design, any stitch that's 9 millimeters, and you can change it around. You can say, I really love this stitch, but I wanted to add stitches or take them away. And it's very, very easy to do. All right. I'm not seeing any questions. So I'm going to go back and we're going to stitch out the fonts and we'll show you a couple of other things you can do with it. All right. And I'll show you some of the other stitches like these ones here of where you can find them. The fun stitches that you're going to find are usually in menu 5. And then I'm going to show you how to do your ribbon stitch because I know there's many people that love the ribbon stitch and don't feel confident enough to do it. So I'll show you where you can get the help for that. And then maybe I'll do that next. Okay. So I'll pull over the stuff and we're going to do the ribbon stitch. And so think about any questions you have while I'm doing that. All right. Okay. So to do a ribbon stitch, I'm coming back to sewing. And this is a card that I'm working with. I put 2 different pieces of a card together. And my ribbon stitches can be found in menu 8. So I'm going to go to menu 8. And the ribbon stitch, the first one is 8.1 is a single ribbon, 8.2 is the double ribbon, and 8.3 is the triple ribbon. Now, another way, if you're not comfortable doing the ribbon stitch, I really suggest that you go to the Help Center because in the Help Center, you can choose techniques and tutorials and then sewing techniques. and then go to the exclusive stitch techniques. And when you pull up a ribbon stitch, it will tell you how to do it. Everything's written out in English. You can make the screen bigger, and you can read. You need to have the 2A foot on, and you're not going to have the IDT engaged. And it says stabilizer, but because I'm using cardboard, I don't need to use a stabilizer. And then where you see this little video, that's a video to show you how to do it. All right. And it gives you so much detail. Now, for those of you that don't have, I'm going to close that down for now. For those of you that don't have the Creative Icon 2 or the original icon, like say, for example, you have the 720, you have an app that you can load onto your phone or a tablet that will give you access to all the videos and how-tos of all the stitches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to content, and I'm going to select a stitch. All right. And every stitch has got its own little character to it. What's important, if you're going to do a stitch for cardstock, don't choose one that has a satin stitch. Like this one here has got little needles with a ballpoint top to them. It's not going to turn out good because it's too heavy a stitch. And so it needs to be something that's not going to have a satin stitch like these two here. Here's another one that's got a satin stitch to it. So I'm just going to choose, let's choose this one right here. All right. Now I'm going to change my camera, and I'm going to show you some little tips about when you're working with ribbon stitches, because it's really very easy to do. And you'll know when you're starting with a ribbon stitch, you never start with the ribbon in your hand. All right. A lot of people think, well, I'm doing a ribbon stitch, I need to put the ribbon down somewhere. And that's not what happens. What we're going to do is we're going to start at the very, very end. All right. And I'm putting my foot down. And when I start, I'm going to use my start stop button instead of the foot pedal, because there's a programmed in stop to this. Watch and see what a beautiful job the machine does with the cardstock. It's beautiful. All right, so there's one stitch. Now I see when I'm looking at this stitch that it's a wider stitch. The stitch itself, when I look at the edit the stitch, all right, it is, wait a second here. I'm going to just check the width of the stitch is 26 millimeters. So that means it's going to move left and right quite a bit. All right. And I need to be prepared about that. So because I'm on the Creative Icon 2, I'm going to turn my projector on, and I will have this grid that's showing up. Do you see this lovely grid? I hope you can see it well enough because it is amazing. I hope you can see it, because right now I can see the stitch and I can see the grid. And as the cardstock is moving left to right, what I want to do is keep an eye on those grid lines. Now, if you don't have the Creative Icon 2, the other thing you can do is to use the multi-line decorative foot, but the grid is actually much easier because the foot's not getting in your way when you're doing it. So I'm pressing the start button. So my eye is looking at the grid lines and making sure it stays parallel to that center where the cardstock changes. So the very first time, when I start doing this the next time, right, after I laid the ribbon in place and I started the machine, the first two stitches sewed the ribbon in place, so I didn't have to hold the ribbon. Now the machine has stopped on its own. I'm going to turn the ribbon over, and I am going to pull it to the left. The needle's on the left. That means I need to bring the ribbon to the left. All right, let me rephrase that. You notice when my machine stopped that the ribbon was on the right and my needle is on the left. You're always going to pull the ribbon to the side where the needle is. All right, so I'm ready to start again. I'm keeping an eye on the stitching. So every time I go, I'm going to take the ribbon, the needle's on the right-hand side. I'm going to stop and I'll tick the ribbon up and I'm going to go over to the next side. Now I got a pop-up message on my machine that said, check my needle thread. All right. It looks like it's good to me, but just let me lift it up and see. I think it's because the cardstock is kind of being irritated by this stitch. So whenever I'm doing a stitch like this on cardstock, I will always check to see how good a job it does when I'm starting. All right. So I'm going to keep going. All right. So the machine stopped on its own. I'm going to pick the ribbon up. I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to pull it so that it touches the needle. I don't want any extra ribbon on the left side. I want it nice and firm. So when I touch the start button again, you notice the needle's on the right and I've moved the ribbon over to the right. It will sew a line to the left. The ribbon is going to cover up that line. That's why it's important you have the ribbon nice and tight to okay. My creative icon stopped. The needle's on the left. I'm going to pull the ribbon over to the left. If you ever find that the ribbon and the needle are on the same side, then you know you've made a mistake. And I'm going to press the start button again. All right. The needle's on the right. I'm going to pull my ribbon over to the right. You see how that works? It's always the same. My needle's on my left. I'm going to turn the ribbon over and pull the ribbon over there. I hope that makes sense. All right, I'm coming back over because I know we got a couple of questions. So when it comes to the looking at the ribbon stitches, the videos are really very valuable. We have an app that's called Creator Q, and regardless of what machine you have, if you have stitches like the ribbon stitches that you would like to learn more about them, you should definitely connect with that app. Load it on your tablet or a phone because it will give you a full video, step-by-step information on how to use those decorative stitches. And that's really kind of wonderful. I think that when I look at those ribbon stitches, they really are fun. And here in this example where I use them right here, this example worked really well. I think the stitches look good. I wanted the black thread. I used black thread there, and I wanted them to have it so that the thread kind of disappeared. Where on the other example of what I was using, I used a red thread, and I want to show you the difference between the two of them, all right? And I'm going to come in, and let me just switch back here to this, and I'll pull this out for a second. All right, and I'm just going to cut. So what I wanted to point out, the first stitch that I used was stitch number 12, and that worked out really, really well. This stitch is sewing beautifully on the left side, but on the right side, you're seeing some of the cardstock start to deteriorate. To me, that would tell me that it's not a good stitch to use on one layer of cardstock because I can see that the cardstock starting to break up. Let's see what we see on the back. And on the back, it's kind of, you don't really see anything, but certainly on the front, that cardstock really is showing that it's starting to get beaten up. And look at on the side that has 2 layers of cardstock, how beautiful that is. All right. So if I'm going to put 2 cardstocks together like this, I'll usually put one that's not a fancy one underneath so that I can build up the layers of it. And you can use a few different things. There is glue, like you can get, like, you know, fabric tack glue that'll dry fast. This is not the best because you want to be able to spread the glue evenly and you don't want it to bubble or do anything with it. When I put these two together, well, I know I was going to be sewing on them, so I just used the 505 spray and I sprayed it on the back of the top one, and then I just fused the two of them together. But obviously I would have gotten better results if I'd had 2 layers underneath the green one too. All right, let's see. We have some questions here. So one of them is, if you go into the layers and uncombine the letters happy, can't you then increase the size of the letters? When it comes to, well, you're talking about in embroidery. Well, let's try that. Let's see what happens with that. In sewing, the letters are their maximum size. You can only make them smaller. You can't make them bigger. But in embroidery, that might work. So let's try that, okay? I'm going to go over and we'll give it a try. So to go from sewing to embroidery, I'm going to touch that little hoop up there. And I'm back at my fonts. Let's say I'm going to choose a sewing font. And we'll come up with the grand alphabet again. And then I can try it with a different font. So I'm just going to put my name in. Hi, my name's Karen. I never introduced myself. I always forget about that. All right. So now when I say okay, let's see if it'll let us ungroup them, right? So to ungroup them, I'm going to go up here to the layers, and ungroup is not allowed. It's not an option. If I was doing this with my embroidery fonts, it would be. And I'll show you the difference between it. Embroidery fonts have a lot more ability to change the size and also change. Let's go to curls. All right. And I'm going to go capital letters and then small letters. And then I'm going to say, okay. So there is my font. And if I wanted to make it bigger, the scale option is there. And it will let me make it 20% bigger on the screen without breaking them apart. And also, if I go up to layers, I have the option of ungrouping them. And this is kind of fun. If you wanted to write a whole sentence and you wanted it to be a wavy line, then I could take those letters, go into Shape Creator, choose a wavy line. All right, I'm going to go to Basic and a wavy line. And now those letters will be on that wavy line. So you could write a whole sentence like that. And if I want the line to be a little shallower, I need to unlock the padlock so I can get that line. So you can make them go on a wavy line if you want to. And I'll just come out and I'll show you what the wavy line looks like. So you could write a whole sentence and the sentence could be on a wavy line. If you're using embroidery fonts, you have a lot more capability than if it's sewing fonts. All right. If there's any other questions, we're coming close to our time. And I hope you've enjoyed playing around with some of these creative ideas. And I hope you give them a try. The ones that I think were the most impressive to me was, you know, playing around with just taking that tissue, putting it on a cardstock, and then from that one napkin, being able to make gift cards and these type of little things like this, you know, so you've got name tags for your presents and everything's coordinated. You can make yourself cards for the table and put people's names on them. And one other thing I wanted to mention to you, this, you know, often when we are sewing or quilting, we're used to using 100% cotton fabric, or if you're a garment sewer, maybe you work with some velvet, some different things. Anytime you're working with a fabric that's got a lot of nap to it, something like a velvet or polar fleece and things like that, remember to go in and lighten your presser foot pressure. You're going to be much happier with the results. The other thing I wanted to point out is here's like a little, I made this for my granddaughter to hang on her tree. And look at the funky fabric that I used on the back of this. All right. When we're working with fabric like quilting fabric, we get in the habit of doing that. Sometimes we forget that when you get onto the crafting side of sewing, you can use all kinds of fun fabrics. Let me show you what it looks like. Here, I brought it over. I bought this during Halloween. isn't that just fabulous? Well, it's great to use behind some of these ornaments because it's got a really iridescent look to it. It's a lot of fun to work with. And so when you're making Christmas ornaments or holiday ornaments, Hanukkah, or you're doing gift cards or things for the table, get a little braver about what you're working with, because look at how much fun that is to see that little iridescent fabric in there. It's a little thicker and firmer, and it holds up really well too. So the next Facebook Live is going to be with Nancy, and she's going to be working specifically on the Quilt Expression 720. So those of you on here who have the 720, make sure to tune in, because I know Nancy's got a lot to show you, and she will probably be going over Stitch Creator and a lot of the functions that you can do, both on the Creative Icon too, but also on the 720. The Quilt Expression 710 does not have the ability to do the large maxi stitches or the Stitch Creator, but the 720 does. And so in many ways, the Quilt Expression 720 has a lot of the features that you will find on the icon. So even, no matter what machine you have, make sure to tune in. The next Facebook Live is December 8th at 2 o'clock Central, 3 o'clock Eastern Time. And Nancy's going to have lots to show you. I hope you had fun today. I hope you all give it a try. And if you've got any questions, I'm going to come back and answer them. So let me know if you give it a try and you've got any questions, because I hope to hear from you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, everybody. And I hope to see you again soon. Bye.